Welcome everyone as we partake in our first virtual Coal Creek Literary Festival mini presentation. We know it isn't the same as our in-person festivals, but as we face another year with COVID restrictions, we didn't want to go without. And we hope you didn't either. So on that note, welcome to Coal Creek Literary Festival 2021. Today, I'd like to welcome Alice Robinson to our discussion. Alice is a writer of essays, fiction and reviews. She has published 2 novels, both with Affirm Press, Anchor Point, longlisted for the Stella Prize and the Indie Book Awards in 2015, and The Glad Shout, winner of the Readings Prize for New Australian Fiction in 2019. Alice has a PhD by research in creative writing from Victoria University, where she was also the recipient of the Vice-Chancellor's Peak Award for Research. Alice is currently working on a 3rd novel. Both Anchor Point and The Glad Shout are works of adult literary fiction that deal with climate change, Australian life and lands. Welcome, Alice. First question up, did you always want to be a writer?
That's a really good question. I think I always really loved reading. And I think that's often a precursor for writers, that they love books and reading as children. But actually, when I first went to uni, I wanted to be an actor. And that's also something that, from talking to a lot of writers, I've found can be a commonality between us, that there is some connection between acting and writing. And a lot of writers have that kind of acting history in their past. And I think it's partly because there's, some of the skills are the same, like you're invested in character, you're thinking about dialogue, that you're deeply invested in story, all of these things. And I think that acting history really helped me in my work. But as it turned out, the course that I went to do at uni wasn't very, it was very theoretical rather than practical. And so in the end, I didn't like the theory around the theatre stuff as much as I liked talking about books. So that's how it happened.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think, as you say, like there is something to be said about having a background in sort of the acting side of things or in another form of creative, because it does just help you experiment and open up your mind to all these other aspects that you have to take into account and consider as well. So yeah, absolutely.
All those art forms, it's just good to be involved in creative pursuits, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. So that actually follows on to my second question was, and you sort of touched on it a little bit there, that you always enjoyed reading. So did you also enjoy obviously telling your own stories as a child, and were you encouraged to do that by your family?
Oh, that's such a good question. My parents were both my mum worked in the field of literacy. She was an academic in that field, and so reading was really important to her. So she read a lot to me when I was a child, and my dad was quite a good storyteller, and he lives on, even today, part of the property where he grew up. And so when you live for a long time or your life in the place where you've always lived, the stories are really embedded in the landscape. So, as we would walk around, he would be saying, oh, that's where such and such happened, and a story would evolve out of the place. And same with the town that surrounded his property. There's like decades and decades of narrative there.
Yeah.
So, that kind of oral storytelling from my father and the reading from my mother were really instrumental in developing my sense of story being important, I suppose. And I probably was encouraged to tell my own stories and to write and illustrate stories and things like that. I remember doing that a lot as a child.
Yeah. And is that what sort of, I guess, authors inspired you on your journey as well throughout it? Was there anyone that sort of stands out in particular, or a couple of authors over the years?
Well, definitely when I was young, I loved the Tomorrow When the War Began books, John Marsden's books, and maybe partially because they feature a girl, that a heroic girl at the center of the story, and that was really meaningful to me growing up. But I read a lot of the classics like The Railway Children or The Secret Garden or Little Women, Anne of Green Gables, all of these kinds of stories, beautiful stories where the language is really evocative, and also often, where they have female protagonists doing interesting things and being smart. Those kinds of stories were really important to me when I was growing up.
Yeah, absolutely. And does, I guess, sort of from those experiences and reading those novels and from those authors, is there like, why did you feel A Glad Shout had to be written? Like, was there something that cropped up from one of them? Was there a missing link, or was it just something that came to you? How did that novel sort of come about? Because obviously there's the authors that you've just mentioned, there's ties to just sort of the narratives that they sort of have and things like that as well, even though yours is obviously completely different, but theming wise.
Well, that book, like for about 10 years before I wrote that book, or in that 10-year period, I had been really interested in climate change for that whole time. So I did the PhD, and my research for the PhD was about climate change in Australia, and that gave rise to the first novel. But I still was interested in catastrophe, I suppose, and in what might happen to Australia if we failed to take action on climate change. So Anchor Point, the first novel, spans 1981 to about 2016, which was in the future when the novel was published, just slightly into the future. But The Glad Shout is a little bit more futuristic. It doesn't say when it's set, but some readers think it's like 100 years into the future. In my mind, it was maybe about 30 or 40 years, so not that long, another generation or so. And just imagining, what will happen if we don't do anything about this problem that we've got. So that was one of the things that was going on. And the other thing was that I wrote that book when I was mainly at home with these two little children that I'd had. They were about maybe 1 and 3 when I started writing. And so a lot of that book is about motherhood as well, and trying to grapple with, what it's like to be a mother, but also what it means to be a mother if you think that, the future that might not exist or it might not be safe.
Yeah. And acting upon things now and how we can influence things that's better for our children in the future and things like that, for sure. I'll hand over to you here very quickly to give us the elevator pitch for both those novels, because some people may not know sort of the blurb, I guess, so to speak, of them. I'll let you explain very briefly about Anchor Point and also The Glad Shout.
Anchor Point is a family story set in regional Victoria mainly, and it spans multi-decades of a family's life. But the main kind of thrust of the story is that one night the mother of these two little girls goes missing, and only one of the daughters knows what's happened, but she chooses not to tell anyone. And so in doing that, she kind of assumes responsibility for the mother's disappearance. And that book is really trying to explore the central question of, can we be the architects of our own destiny? Do we have any control over what happens in our lives? Are we responsible for what happens, or do things just happen to us and then we have to cope? And The Glad Shout is a story about a huge storm destroying Melbourne in the near future, and a mother and child have to survive. They get taken to a stadium, not unlike the stadiums in Hurricane Katrina, post-Katrina, something like the MCG, where they have to survive. And again, that's a kind of a story about to what extent we're in control of our lives, but also how do we retain hope in the face of those kinds of things. I really wanted that in The Glad Shout there to be a heroic mother at the centre of the story, because I feel that mothers are heroic and they're not depicted enough that way in fiction.
No, I don't think, I completely agree with you there. I don't think they often are, and it's their everyday lives. There's so much to do, as you'd sort of know, having, not so little ones anymore, but you're just sort of running around doing a million things, and having characters that women can aspire to that also, have kids, and just the children don't revolve around their whole lives, so to speak, as well. They can be the hero of their own story as well, which is really inspiring. So, and is there someone that you bounce your ideas off as you're coming up with the narratives and writing and things like that, or is it more something that you internalize until you get to a certain point?
A lot of writers have writing groups where they they have the support of other writers as they're going, but I don't have one. I think as you get closer to publication, you have an editor and a publisher and a little team of people who are helping you. But until you get to that point, most of the time I'm working alone. And I've kind of come around to feeling like that's okay. A lot of writers also like to go away together and write together, or to work alongside other writers in the studio or in a space. And I actually find I've really come to realize just this year that maybe I'm not that good at that, that I like to be alone. There's something kind of private about it. And sometimes when I can be really involved in what I'm writing and I'm really thinking hard, and it almost becomes an embodied process, which is weird because it's, you know, you'd think of it as an intellectual thing, but it can almost become like being a pianist where you sort of, the key hands on the keys are kind of musical in some way.
Yeah.
And it sounds strange, but to get into that space, I think being alone is good.
Yeah. And it's interesting, every writer has their own way of working. Similarly, when I've sort of written a couple of things as well, when I was working with magazines, it was like a different sofa to a different chair to a different desk would produce different results. But I also found, very much similar to yourself, like as much as writing groups are good and bouncing ideas off other people and things like that, I've actually found I was someone that preferred to literally just be shut in like a room of no matter what size, just by myself. And I love music, but even having no music playing or anything like that was literally just in your own space, and hours can go by before you sort of really like realize what the time is, and you just get lost in your own world and things like that. There's something, I think you hit the nail on the head with it. There's something magical about it.
It is really magical, and I think it is really weird and individual too, like you're saying, like everybody has to find their own way, and it doesn't really matter as long as you're getting the words out. You know, you need to find whatever way works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And which, I guess on that note, which character was the most fun to write that you've ever written about?
I really loved writing the grandmother character in The Glad Shout. She's not a stereotypical grandmother. She's a playwright and a bohemian, and has a lot of parties. The mother, Isabel, is the main character, and her mother is pretty conservative. She's a real estate agent, but her mother is this bohemian character. But so the mother feels that the grandmother is not a good person to look after the child. That she's irresponsible, and that her own childhood was dealt with badly by this woman because she's more interested in having fun and in ideas and things like that than being a parent. So that was a lot of fun to write. But I find writing, it's really hard work, actually. And sometimes you can have really beautiful moments of delight. And a lot of the time, it's only later when the project's finished or when you look at it as a whole that it can be kind of fun or pleasurable. Doing it in the moment is interesting, but I find it hard work.
Absolutely, I can imagine. So, and how much pre-planning goes into your stories? Like, do you sit down initially and come up with an idea of where it's going, or do you just let it flow into directions?
I usually do some writing first. I find it hard to imagine how people do all the planning before they've how they hold it all in their head or come up with the ideas before they've done the writing. So for me, something about the writing process gives rise to some of the ideas. You have to go into that process to work out what you're doing.
Yeah.
And then after that, when you've got a bit of a sense, then you can do some planning so that the next draft or the next part is more formed or planned out. Yeah, it's so funny. Again, it's, everyone has their own way. Right. I think it would be faster, and editors and publishers like it if you do the planning first because you can potentially write the book faster. But I've never had that much success with that.
Yeah. I guess did you sort of plan out the grandmother character you're just explaining about as well? Or was that something that just came naturally as you were writing, that you wanted this bohemian character?
You don't know where it comes from. And that's part of the magic and the fun of doing it, I think. Like, I find it, maybe I would lose interest if I knew everything before I sat down to write. Well, now I know it all, so what's the point?
Yeah. You go on a journey of exploring the characters at the same time in the story and things like that, as a reader would say. It's incredible. Yeah. What should we keep our eyes peeled open for the future? So is there anything you can tell us about this third book, or not yet?
Yeah, it's probably too early to say. been working on it for a while. Last year was a terrible year for everybody, and it was particularly, complicated for me because I have little kids who are in primary school now, and so when schools closed, that was, that took away all my writing time basically, and I think that would have been the case for lots of people.
Yeah.
So
full-time homeschooling.
Yeah, it was a lot. So now I'm just coming back to the book. I've got a 20-week period now where I got a little grant from Yarra City Council. And so I've got a little bit, slightly more time each week for 20 weeks. So it's good having a little, like a determined period of time.
Yeah.
So, I've got to make the most of this time and the work. So that's really exciting, but I'm not sure. Again, like I've got to go into the process and then see what comes out.
Yeah. Do you have an expected ETA on when it might be able to hit the shelves, or just taking it as it goes?
Yeah,
no.
It will be a few years. The first book took 7 years. The second one was, I think, took 4 years.
Yeah.
Maybe it will be faster, but probably not. And I've kind of submitted to that now, especially after last year where everything was so out of control. You just think you've got to just, things take their own time, and that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And when it's ready, it'll be ready. So, but you'll have to let us know at the Literary Festival so we can tell everyone when the next one comes out. But in the meantime, final questions. I won't hold you up any longer, and thank you for your time today. Where can readers purchase your books from?
Oh, I think they're available in most bookshops. They're available online, anywhere that you would buy books online. I don't think that you can buy them internationally, but that probably isn't a problem for your listeners. But any bookshop, I bet all the local bookshops in Gippsland probably have them because I lived in Gippsland for a long time.
Yeah.
And otherwise the Readings website's good.
Thanks. Perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Alice. I won't hold you up any longer. Much appreciated. And we look forward to hopefully welcoming you back to the festival in person in the future. And keep us all in the loop with the third book so we can all grab a copy of it once it's all released. So thank you again for your time.
It's nice talking to you. I'll see you later.
Thank you.